Welcome to the debate. We are, I think it's safe to say, living through an era defined by just relentless acceleration. Some people have been calling it a velocity vortex, where the kind of stability you need for traditional 5-year rigid plans, it just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, every quarter brings some massive disruption.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. The world is moving way too fast for any kind of static blueprint, whether you're talking about a business, a career, or even just personal development.
Exactly. And this constant state of flux has spurred this massive societal trend, right? This push to apply these very structured, high-efficiency frameworks, things like Lean or Agile that were, originally designed for software, and apply them to our personal lives, to our habits, our careers. People are just desperate for tools that minimize risk.
Oh, you see it everywhere. The explosion of habit tracking apps, biohacking, all these complex decision-making matrices. But this, I think, brings us right to the core tension we need to explore today.
It does. Our central question is this: is the best path to, let's say, fulfillment and success found primarily through static self-optimization? So applying these efficient, iterative frameworks to your goals. Or is it through radical self-acceptance and narrative reauthoring? The idea that you have to embrace your own psychological complexity and heal from the past before you can even try to build something new.
And see, that's where we take a fundamental issue. I just don't buy the premise that we can optimize ourselves like a machine. I'm going to argue that prioritizing that kind of rigorous optimization, it just ignores the deep, messy, psychological reality of being human. What I'd call the labyrinth of self. I think true freedom has to come from accepting that complexity first, and then consciously rewriting your internal story.
And I'll argue for the necessity of those strategic, iterative frameworks. The goal isn't to be a machine, not at all. It's about cultivating what I call an agile edge. I believe that very structure is what gives us the scaffolding to achieve rapid, intentional growth and ultimately a future-proof life. So my premise is pretty simple. Static blueprints are obsolete. Relying on them is just a formula for burnout and becoming irrelevant. Instead, we have to treat personal goals as a continuous, low-risk experiment. We can leverage what's known in the tech world as the build, measure, learn loop. It's effectively a scientific approach to personal progress. We have to stop agonizing over the perfect solution, because that pursuit of perfection, it's really the silent assassin of progress.
Okay, that's a fair point about perfectionism being an obstacle. I'll give you that.
Right. So instead of waiting for some ideal moment, you launch small and you learn big. It's what we could call a personal MVP, or a minimum viable action. So you ask, what is the absolute smallest, most manageable version of this new habit or project that I can launch right now to get feedback? This whole iterative approach, it just drastically reduces the fear of failure, and you get this validated learning, which makes sure your efforts aren't, outdated before you even get started. And we can even use these principles for the big stuff, for major life decisions, a job, a new city, even choosing a partner. There are models like optimal stopping or the 37% rule that can minimize regret.
Wait, hold on. How do you apply the 37% rule to choosing a partner? That sounds incredibly cold and really reductive of human connection.
It's not about being cold. It's about being smart. It's about establishing an evidence-based baseline to cut through analysis paralysis. For a big decision where your options appear one after another, the rules suggest you sort of sample the first 37% of them to establish a standard of what good looks like. After that point, you commit to the very next option that surpasses that standard. So it shifts the burden from just anxious intuition to a kind of calculated confidence. Optimization is about intentional design.
I see why you think that, but I would frame it very, very differently. To me, these optimization frameworks often fail for one big reason. They treat the self like predictable software. They completely ignore the foundational psychological reality of being human. I mean, you can run algorithms all day, but the human self is this dynamic, living narrative. It's constantly shaped by these invisible scripts and early blueprints, things like our attachment styles from childhood, that dictate our choices without us even knowing it.
So you're saying the core problem is like a corrupted operating system?
Exactly. Before you optimize anything, you have to debug the system. Our intuition, that fast reactive mind, what some call System 1, it's just riddled with cognitive biases. We all fall for the fundamental attribution error or confirmation bias. They just warp our reality. And worse, so many people are operating with what you might call a stolen self. They've internalized manipulative tactics like gaslighting, or they're just desperately trying to live up to some impossible digital doppelganger they see on social media.
I recognize that challenge. For sure.
So the prerequisite for any meaningful, sustainable action, I would insist, is a deep internal audit, what I call the interrogation room. And then after that, radical acceptance of the messy, unscripted self. Because otherwise, all the optimization in the world is you're just getting faster at building the wrong life on a flawed foundation.
See, I'm not convinced because these structured frameworks offer a viable path out of that psychological paralysis you're describing. You can't just wait for perfect emotional clarity. It might never come. You have to start moving forward. Action creates data, and that data creates clarity. The build, measure, learn loop, it forces you to focus on continuous improvement and being adaptable. You start to see unexpected shifts not as failures, but as learning moments.
But learning what? If your core values are misaligned, what you're learning is totally irrelevant.
That's what mental models are for. Things like first principles thinking are designed precisely to strip away those inherited assumptions you're talking about. First principles means breaking a problem down to its most basic, foundational truth, not the dogma you inherited. Or we use a tool like inversion to think about the opposite of what we want. These frameworks are designed to fight cognitive bias by giving you an objective structure outside of your emotional state. You're using structure to escape the tyranny of feelings.
I come at it from such a different way. While that kind of intellectual deconstruction is useful, the real roadblock for most people isn't a lack of a logical framework. It's unaddressed psychological debt. How can anyone efficiently run a sprint when they are constantly walking on eggshells inside their own head or being pulled around by the echoes within of past trauma? These unresolved conflicts, they just lead to self-sabotage, often right when you're about to succeed.
Okay, but how long does that internal work take? Are we talking years of therapy? We're in a velocity vortex, remember. Waiting for perfect healing means falling hopelessly behind.
But focusing only on speed and metrics, on the external build, that can lead to severe agility fatigue, especially if the underlying self-limiting beliefs aren't first addressed through some rigorous self-compassion. The process of auditing yourself is what establishes an internal inner compass. It finds your core, authentic values before you start aligning actions to them. If you're not aligned, you're just speeding towards somebody else's goal. That guarantees disillusionment down the line.
But what if I argue that the structured approach is the healing mechanism? If we accept your premise that a lot of people are operating with a stolen self, then we need a system to build a new, intentional identity, right? So by using tools like the 4 laws of behavior change, making good habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, we stop relying on willpower, which is so fleeting, and we engineer our environment for success instead.
That just sounds like behavior modification. It doesn't sound like profound change.
It's both. We shift from outcome-based habits to identity-based habits. So every time you perform a small action, you are casting a vote for the person you want to become. You want to be a writer? You write 500 words. You're not focused on publishing a book. You're focused on being the type of person who writes every day. This directly tackles that idea of a stolen identity by actively, intentionally building a new one. This is freedom and responsibility in action. It's self-determination.
That is a compelling argument. I agree that casting votes for a new identity is a powerful psychological tool. However, it still mostly focuses on the individual's internal machinery. What about the sheer unpredictability of human interaction? That's where most of our life satisfaction and pain comes from.
That complexity is exactly why we need the structure.
But strategic living, like game theory, it's designed for clear incentives and rational actors. Real life is governed by these messy emotional systems where people are, well, they're fundamentally irrational. They're driven by their own biases. Trying to apply precise, optimized logic often just falls apart when you're dealing with other people's System 1 flaws, or, manipulative puppet masters at work.
And how does simple acceptance help you navigate a manipulative boss?
Because it enables true resilience. You can optimize your morning routine all you want, but true resilience requires second-order thinking about the consequences of emotional choices, not just the immediate action. It requires setting healthy boundaries. And that boundary work, it's a fundamentally non-algorithmic, non-optimized process. It often involves embracing conflict, feeling discomfort, and just saying no to people who've optimized their system to take advantage of you. Emotional truth is the metric for success there, not efficiency.
I would argue that strategic frameworks account for that uncertainty by rigorously preparing to be wrong. You seem to think optimized living means never failing, but it means intentionally planning for failure. There's a technique called the pre-mortem. It forces you to imagine catastrophic failure before a project even starts. You ask, if this all goes horribly wrong in 6 months, why did it happen? And that process, it uncovers vulnerabilities that pure intuition just misses.
But that's still a logistical exercise. It reveals flaws in the plan. It doesn't heal the underlying psychological fear of failure itself.
It minimizes the toll of unexpected failure by planning for it. This calculated confidence is so much better than living in a constant state of anxiety, paralyzed by the unknown. And by defining our context, our deepest why, and leveraging what we could call high talent density within ourselves, we reduce chaos and gain autonomy. And that autonomy, the ability to choose, that is the ultimate intentional application of freedom.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the self is so static or modular that it can be assembled like a circuit board. The self is too fluid. This relentless goal of optimization, it risks turning personal growth into a consumer product. It's focused only on achieving the vital few goals instead of accepting the messy, beautiful reality of the evolving self and all the contradictory parts of being human.
But why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't we accept the self and strive for efficiency in our behaviors?
Because the drive for algorithmic perfection often teaches us to avoid the necessary pain of confrontation and failure and self-doubt. The true purpose of life isn't achieving some peak state. It's finding meaning and resilient joy, often through what's called tragic optimism. And that joy emerges from confronting pain and embracing our full, complex human story, not avoiding it with a perfect framework. We have to honor the labyrinth of self before we can claim to master our journey. If we skip the healing, we're perpetually running from ourselves.
It seems we agree that intentionality is absolutely key, but we diverge on whether the path begins with the spreadsheet or with the soul. My position remains that adaptation is existential. Frameworks like build, measure, learn provide the scaffolding you need for clarity, for risk reduction, and for sustained growth in this chaotic world. The goal is a life of purpose achieved through predictable, iterative progress.
And I maintain that while structure is incredibly useful, once you have clarity, the foundation has to be authenticity. No amount of external optimization can fix an identity that's been eroded by invisible scripts. The path to true belonging and purpose requires the courageous, non-algorithmic act of radical acceptance, the willingness to sit with the unscripted self and then choose to live from that space. The scaffolding is useless if the ground beneath it is crumbling. We have to heal the self before we can engineer it.
So, we've explored whether the modern quest for a better life should be engineered with strategic precision or embraced with profound self-acceptance.
Yeah, and the material offers really strong arguments for both approaches. It suggests that the most thoughtful path may in fact require both rigorous structure and profound introspection to really navigate this world.